The chandelier over the Viridian ballroom shook like a constellation when the music changed. Crystal chimed. Laughter washed the room in gold. Robert Langley moved through it like he owned every second. Tall, precise, his smile practiced down to the last angle. Beside him, his son Michael was all easy charm and careless jokes. People loved Michael. Cameras loved Michael. For a moment, under the flash and the applause, father and son looked like a storybook photograph. Then Michael stopped laughing. It was barely a breath. One instant he was pointing at a joke, the next he stood still as if someone had pressed pause. His hand dropped, slow and strange. People thought he'd mock faint. He didn't. His face went white. He tried to step, and his knees did not obey. Silence fell like a curtain. In that hush, Robert's jaw tightened in a way that made the room colder. The crowd parted. Someone called for a medic. Michael's eyes were wide and bright, not glazed. Alarm and incredulity hung there like a question. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. By the time they reached the hospital, Michael could not move his legs. Doctors arrived in rotating teams. Machines hummed. Tests bloomed across screens. Robert stood at the edge of every room, a statue whose hands flexed and relaxed. He barked questions, then softened them with money and introductions. He is a billionaire, yes, but money does not yield answers from bone and synapse. The faces of doctors were careful and tired. They used words like inconclusive and idiopathic. They promised more scans, more specialists. They promised empathy with the same mechanical cadence. In the hospital quiet, the Langley family rearranged like tectonic plates. Sophia, the head housekeeper, flew between the penthouse and the ICU with a paper bag of sandwiches and the composure of someone who'd seen grief poke its head into gilded rooms before. John, the butler, kept the ledger and the secrets of the pantry. Evelyn, family physician and old friend of Robert's, called late at night, her voice a thread of both science and sorrow. Panic can do strange things, she said once on the phone. Careful. But we must rule things out. Michael lay in a private ward with white linen that smelled faintly of lemon and disinfectant. His hands were pale, like he'd left his color in the ballroom. He typed with a single finger on a pad. I can feel. I can see. I can't move. He smiled at the nurses when they offered watermelon slices, a practiced, distant smile. Questions roared in Robert's mind louder than the cameras ever could. Had someone done this to him? A rival? A vendetta? A hidden illness? He hired specialists, lawyers, high-paid consultants. He ordered private tests that could buy them access to every rare diagnosis printed in journals. Each test pushed the answer further away. At home, in the echo of the penthouse, the marble floor kept its cool as family friends murmured about miracles and miracles not coming. Robert began to look like a man waiting for a verdict he couldn't read. There was anger simmering, at fate, at time, at whatever invisible thing had stolen his son's steps. And then, when the house needed hands that could soften its edges, they brought in Emma. She arrived on a rain-slick morning, carrying a small duffel and an old photograph tucked into a book. Her clothes smelled faintly of bread and lavender. She was not from their world, she was from somewhere practical, a life where plates came first and prestige did not speak. But her eyes were steady and curious in a way that pulled people forward instead of closing them down. Robert watched her as he might watch a chess move he did not understand. He explained Michael's paralysis in words she'd heard only in the news and in rumors. Emma listened with her hands folded, not with pity but with attention. There was a softness in her gaze that made even the marble feel less cold. "Where will I start?" she asked simply. Sophia shrugged, the gesture full of unspoken histories. "Start with his room," she said. "If anything will be left behind that matters, it's there." Emma nodded. She had no diploma or certificate that could explain intuition. She had only a habit of noticing small things other people walked past. She had no idea then that the smallest thing, the tiniest, most ordinary object, would slide like a key into a lock nobody even knew was closed. Pause. Think about the last time a small thing made you see someone differently. What was it? Cliffhanger. Hospitals have a language: antiseptic, click of monitors, the whisper of shoes on linoleum. It's a language Michael knew now by sound, but not by response. Days stretched into a rhythm of tests and thin laughs. Specialists visited like emissaries from different empires of knowledge, each speaking their own technical grammar. They probed, frowned, consulted. Yet the scans came back stubbornly pale of explanation. No fracture, no tumor, no lesion to blame. The body looked structurally intact. The body, it seemed, refused to offer a reason. At home, Robert's world narrowed into a corridor of concern. He'd made fortunes by reading markets and men. He vowed to read this too. Money bought access, but it could not compel a body to move. It could buy privacy, specialists, experimental therapies, quiet rooms, extra nurses, but it could not conjure certainties. Michael's paralysis was a new currency the household had to learn. Visitors filed in with flowers and hushed condolences. Some left quickly. Others lingered with the awkwardness of people trying to bridge a gulf with casseroles. Emma's first days were small chores and careful observations. She unfolded shirts with a tenderness that spoke of a world where things mattered because they were used, not because they glittered. She noticed the pattern Michael liked on his pajamas, the tiny sailboats. She found, in a drawer under a stack of glossy magazines, an old sketchbook with edges long softened by thumbprints. It smelled faintly of smoke and the sea, a scent of memory, not of money. In the hospital room, Michael's eyes found the little things too. He watched a fly crawl across the windowsill with a fascination that seemed to be looking for a map back to motion. Evelyn, the family physician, had a way of being blunt and kind at once. She sat with Robert in a sunlit waiting area that smelled faintly of coffee and resolve. "We need to consider psychogenic causes," she said, careful. Robert's face tightened like a fist. "It's not a failure of the body. It's the brain's way of protecting itself from unbearable truths. It's not," she paused, reading the room, "an insult. It's medicine." Robert listened, as if the words were cold coins dropped onto velvet. His mind wanted villains. He wanted a poison to point at, a perpetrator to indict. The idea that his son's body might be protecting him from something inside him, something memory-shaped or grief-shaped, felt like a betrayal of the rules he had used to win. Questions began to multiply with a new ferocity. What could be so awful that the brain would take away movement? Had Michael been crushed by a secret guilt, an incident nobody knew? Was the answer a memory, a loss, a hidden event that family wealth had cleaned up and locked away? Back in Michael's room, Emma spread a towel on the sill and arranged a small cup of tea. She had a way of being neither intrusive nor absent. She put the sketchbook on his lap, thumbed its pages, and let silence do some of the talking. The drawings were childish at first. Boats, a dog with triangle ears, a sun with a face. Then images shifted. A cliff. A slammed door. A shadow at the bottom of a staircase. Names were nowhere written, but the drawings had a rhythm of fear. One page was stuck together with dried tears, a pressed moment of trembling ink. Emma sat still. She read the pictures the way some people read maps. She did not have the credentials of a psychiatrist. She had a hunger to understand people by the traces they left behind. The pages told a story of a boy who had hidden behind a laugh and put a lock on something terrible. Evelyn, when shown the sketchbook, softened. "This could be a key," she said quietly. "This could let us reach him. But keys require doors. And doors require someone willing to knock." That night, Michael's eyes tracked Emma as she rose to go. He tapped the pad with a finger and wrote, "How?" Emma sat back down. She felt the room as if it were an ocean she might wade into. She thought of the sketchbook and the way fear lived inside bones. "Tell me about the cliff," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Michael's lips trembled. He tried to answer, and the sound came out as a ghost of a laugh. Nothing moved below his ribs. But his eyes, oh, his eyes, they carried a small, stubborn flame. What memory had he locked behind that flame? And who had the key? Cliffhanger. The sketchbook became Emma's quiet obsession. She carried it like a talisman, flipping pages the way others leafed through a photo album. Each picture was a breadcrumb. Each stroke felt like a sentence someone had hidden in the margins of their life. One page showed a house, not the penthouse with its marble and glass, but a smaller place with peeling paint and a willow tree. Another page showed a car on a rain-slick road. A third showed a boy standing at water's edge, hands stretched as if to catch something too heavy to hold. Emma began to speak of the images to Michael in low, measured sentences. She described the boats and the willow. She named the dog in the margin. Sometimes his breathing would change, a little hitch of recognition. Sometimes his eyes would close and a tiny muscle would twitch. She learned 3 things in those small sessions. 1. There were things you could not force. Movement didn't respond to command the way a limb responds to a doctor's request. It responded to memory and trust. 2. Robert had become a fortress of avoidance. The family had built policies around shame and silence the way some people build walls, brick by brick, announcement by announcement. They had papered over accidents and smoothed the world with money when it cracked. 3. The most ordinary objects could be evidence. Emma found one of those objects in the bottom of a nightstand drawer, a small, rusted key wrapped in a bit of blue ribbon. It was ordinary enough to be mundane, small enough to be ignored. But when she held it, it hummed with meaning, the way a bell hums when fingers near its rim. She took the key to the nurse, a soft-spoken woman named Maria, and asked if she could keep it by Michael's pillow. Maria shrugged and smiled. He likes small things, she said. Keeps him company. At night, Emma sat on the edge of Michael's bed and told him stories from the sketchbook. She let the drawings guide the tales like a lighthouse steered a sailor. She spoke of a boy who could not bear to look at the sea because the sea had taken someone he loved. She spoke of doors and keys, and of the strange, clumsy courage it takes to open them. There was a silence in the telling, full of soft sounds, the hiss of oxygen, the creak of the chair, the slight rustle of sheets. It felt like the world tightening itself into a single attention. Michael's fingers clenched once, then relaxed. Once, his toe twitched. An involuntary, minuscule fact. It was nothing and everything. Emma knew she was skirting a line. She was not a therapist. She was a maid with a tenderness that had more to do with listening than with solutions. But she had learned something essential. People sometimes speak through the things they leave behind. They speak with drawings, trinkets, the angles of their laugh. If you read closely, you could translate grief into a path. She asked Michael to squeeze her hand if he understood. His hand lay limply, pale as paper. He did not move. So Emma did something small. She took his non-moving hand and placed the rusted key in it. The metal was cool, and it made a soft sound against his skin. Sometimes, she whispered, a key is not just for a door. It is for remembering. It is for letting the locked thing breathe. He blinked. The room seemed to hush as if someone had pressed a glass ear to their lives. Outside, the city murmured on, unbothered by the private gravity of one hospital room. Inside, everyone leaned a little closer to a boy who had become a map of absence. Later, Evelyn sat on a stool and watched them. You read him, she said softly to Emma. You saw what others filed as inconclusive. Emma shrugged, embarrassed by praise. I just paid attention, she said. Evelyn's eyes shone with that clinical kindness that could cut through stubbornness. Attention is a kind of medicine, she said. Sometimes the body needs a route back that doesn't come on a scan. There was a moment then, a weightless, trembling pause, when Michael's mouth curved minutely, as if he were on the brink of a secret laugh. He tried to say something and the sound stopped halfway, swallowed by the throat. Emma compressed the moment into a single thought. Doors open when someone is brave enough to knock and someone else brave enough to keep knocking with them. But whose door was behind that key? And what lay on the other side? Cliffhanger. Some secrets are small and sharp, like thorns. Others are wide and wet, like rivers. Emma found the latter waiting in the pages of the sketchbook like a quiet tide. One drawing kept repeating, a half moon, a bridge, a figure leaning over water. In the margins, the boy had drawn himself with his head bent, hands empty. There was a sequence where waves became lines, lines became words. Emma started to read the drawings as though they were sentences. She asked Evelyn if they could try an experiment, not medical, exactly, but guided. A therapist, someone trained in memory and narrative, might help. Robert resisted at first. He wanted empirical data, results on a chart, an explanation he could purchase and put on a shelf. Evelyn navigated him with the patience of someone who understands how wealth mistakes itself for control. Finally, a gentle therapist named Dr. Patel came to the hospital suite. He had a low voice and a way of making questions sound like invitations. "Michael," Dr. Patel said, sitting across from him, "I'm going to tell you a story. If it's true for you, squeeze my hand." Emma watched the way the story landed. She watched the chest rise and fall, the tiny flinch that is not always seen when something remembers itself. Dr. Patel wove a narrative from Emma's notes and Michael's drawings, a childhood summer, a small house, a willow, a car in rain. He invited Michael to picture the scene, to place his face in it. He asked about smells, textures, the wrongness in the air that children feel without having words for it. There is a particular cruelty to memory when it is a child's memory. It is precise in its terror. Michael's eyes changed color in that telltale way, not physically, but in the way attention tightened. He made no conscious movement. But then, slowly, his jaw wavered as if he were chewing on a corner of an old hurt. Dr. Patel's voice softened. "Who else was there?" he asked. The answer came not in words but in a wet intake of breath. The machines hummed like witnesses. Michael's hand, still largely immobile, curled, and for the first time since the gala, his fingers closed around the rusted key Emma had placed there. His grip was weak but deliberate. It was a small, explosive thing. It made the nurse drop a tray somewhere outside the room. It made Robert's face fold in a way that looked like surrender. It made Emma feel a heat behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights. "Water," Michael tried to say, a sound like fog clearing. He could not finish it. Words were traffic moving too fast for a bridge blown in pieces. He had been in water, once. A child standing on a dock with a parent who had promised to return. He had believed that promise with the whole soft architecture of a child's trust. What followed was a blur filed away, wrapped in a secret the family had never spoken aloud. Wealth had smoothed the edges of the event, paid for silence where honesty might have lived. The paralysis had come as a guardian then, the body's unwillingness to engage with a memory too sharp to live with. It had nothing to do with toxins or villains. It had to do with grief that had been shelved as something dangerous to look at. When Emma read the sketchbook aloud that night, the lines about the bridge, the willow, the way the water took a laugh and didn't give it back, Michael's chest rose. A single tear escaped and slid along the pale canvas of his cheek. It was the first movement that felt like voluntary grief rather than a medical symptom. "Breathe," Dr. Patel said gently. "Let the memory be small. Let it be a thing you can carry." Michael did not move his legs yet, but his fingers twitched again. He squeezed Dr. Patel's hand, harder. The strength surprised them all. The next hours worked like a tide. Each small response nudged the next small response. It was not dramatic television recovery. It was the patient, ridiculous, beautiful work of a human remembering how to feel and finding that the body could follow. Robert sat in the chair like a man who had learned a new grammar of apology. He had been the kind of father who bought safety and counted it as caring. He had never learned the tender work of listening. Now he watched his son recall a wound he had helped bury with too much haste. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael tapped with the pad, the single-word questions always the heaviest. Emma put her hand on Michael's arm, a small vessel of warmth against the cool hospital sheets. "Sometimes," she said softly, "no one knows how to ask." And then Michael did something almost impossible to believe. He moved his toes. A shimmy that was barely a rumor of motion, but it was motion. It was proof that the bridge inside him had a planks left to test. But there are other bridges in families, made of shame, of silence, of transactions. They do not mend with a single turn of a key. What would Robert do when the truth wanted not only to be understood but to be named aloud? Would he step toward the water with his son, or turn away? Cliffhanger. Recovery, like forgiveness, does not arrive as a parade. It seeps in through the corners, a toe that moves, a laugh that isn't forced, a hand that finds another in the night. After the memory surfaced, the hospital became a place of small, careful experiments. Michael's progress was not linear. Some mornings he found his voice and whispered jokes with a face like sunlight. Other afternoons he would retreat behind a film of exhaustion and the old, protective stillness. But each step, a finger, a twitch of an ankle, the ability to pull a blanket over his knees, was a promise kept by the body once it recognized that the mind had stopped hoarding the past. Emma kept the sketchbook under her pillow like a holy thing. She sat with Michael and read aloud. Sometimes she hummed a song from his childhood and his lips curved before anything else happened. Sometimes she brought a small paper boat she had folded herself and set it on the bedside table. The boat reminded them both that small things can steer a mind. Robert transformed in ways that made people whisper. He stopped ordering results and started asking questions. He went to sessions with Dr. Patel and learned how to listen to a hurt that had once been bought out of sight. The billionaire who had once believed that money could fix anything learned how to sit in the uncomfortable, patient work of being present. There were other changes too. Sophia eased her guard. John stopped pretending that silence was the same as strength. The house, which had been a palace of immaculate surfaces and well-timed smiles, softened along its edges. People began to speak names in full again. They let pronouns fall away and used real words where gossip had used currency. One afternoon, as autumn light sifted through the blinds, Michael asked for something simple, to walk to the window. It was an ordinary request with an extraordinary weight. He wanted to see the city. He wanted to know if the world had moved on, if it had kept the good things while letting them keep the bad. Emma helped him sit up. The movement was clumsy and full of courage. He put his feet on the floor and, with a walker and 2 nurses hovering like steady oars, took a few steps. The first one was a small miracle, a testament not to wealth or experts, but to attention, to time, to the bravery of facing a memory with someone who would hold the key with their hand. When he reached the window, he did not look like a man who had been conquered. He looked like someone who'd learned that the map of himself had been redrawn. Robert stood behind him, an uncertain tether, and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. The gesture trembled with apology and with love. Emma watched them. She had come into the house to fold shirts and make tea. She had found a sketchbook and a key, a child's secret and a family's blind spot. She had listened. "What are you thinking?" Michael asked her quietly, the voice frayed but present. Emma smiled in the slow way of people who have seen too much and are still voting yes for the world. "I'm thinking small things are very big sometimes," she said. The media, hungry for a neat headline, would call it a miracle. The psychologists would call it a recovery. The family would call it a lesson learned. None of those alone captured the truth. Healing was messy, slow, and required the permission to grieve out loud. In the kitchen that night, Sophia made a pot of stew and put it on the table without fanfare. John fetched plates. Robert asked if he could help. It was ordinary and sacred and clumsy. They ate. Laughter came, tentative at first, then more honest. At the end of the script, when the cameras had moved on and the house returned to the cadence of a private life, Michael posted a single line on a small, rarely used blog. "I moved today. Tiny things can move mountains." Emma read it and let out a small laugh. She thought of the rusted key and the page with the bridge and the way a boy could hide a river inside himself and then find a hand to follow. There is a question left, the kind storytellers like to leave dangling so listeners will take it with them. What would you do if you found the sketchbook in someone you loved? Would you ask about the bridge, or walk away? Tell us below. Have you ever found a small thing that changed how you see someone? Share it.